Hey, welcome everybody. Welcome to Everyday Asphalt. My name is Jim Warren with SAC A, and welcome. The purpose of this program is to go a little bit deeper in the areas of materials, design, construction, and maintenance. We post all these programs on our YouTube site. Go to YouTube, type in SAC A. Remember to like, subscribe, and share so you'll be notified of any additional when new programs come up. This program airs once a month, and so every month we have a new program up there. We also are posting other materials up there as well. We're also on Audible, we're on Spotify, and we're also on the Apple Podcast, so these programs will be in audio-only version up there as well, so you can listen to us as you're driving down the road. Welcome, everybody. John Epps.
Good to be here, Jim.
With TTI. And Richard Izzo, formerly with TxDOT, now a consultant with SAC A and HMAC, so welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Likewise.
This
issue's been going on for a while, and we're going to, for lack of a better word, we're going to call it SAC A aggregates, and it has to deal with the surface aggregate condition of the materials that we're going to be using. And as the program in Texas has grown bigger and bigger, there has been a greater and greater demand on aggregates all over the place. And one of those areas where is a demand is on the friction aggregate, which we would generally refer to as SAC A. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Yeah, Jim, the surface aggregate characteristics is what SAC is being,
right.
And the A is the highest category of 2 or 3 categories that TxDOT has identified. And we'll talk about a little bit about the history of SAC A and where we are and where we're going over the next several minutes here. The engineers have been responsible for providing friction on highways for years and years and years. It's nothing new. It's part of our everyday activities. It's become more formal and more organized since 1967, when there was a federal mandate that came out that said every state shall have a formal program to take care of this. This was probably largely responsible for the tort liability laws changing in this country in the middle 60s. And it really made it possible for individuals to sue state agencies or federal agencies. And that was the start of a substantial number of lawsuits and brought more attention to the issue. So in June of 1967, the feds passed a mandate that every state will have a program. TxDOT responded with this with a wet surface crash reduction program. We'll talk about it a little bit. It's based on skid resistance or friction, aggregate selection, wet surface crash analysis as well. The names have changed a little bit over the years. Wet weather accident reduction program. We'll talk about surface aggregate selection and some of the latest revisions on the forms there.
Okay, very good.
Richard's going to go ahead and talk about the surface aggregate selection forms that are used presently by TxDOT.
Yeah, as Dr. Epps mentioned, for those who've been around, this referred to in the past as the Wet Weather Accident Reduction Program, WARP. In 2011, that was changed, became the Wet Surface Crash Reduction Program. So how does the surface aggregate selection, the SAC, is determined? Well, it comes down to the program. There are 3 components of the program. So the districts, they will work with the Traffic Safety Division, and that's where they conduct the wet surface crash analysis. They'll look at the CRIS database, the Crash Results Information System, that database, and then they'll also work with the Maintenance Division, and that's a part of the skid testing. And the third part is working with the Materials and Test Division on the aggregate selection, and that's where the SAC.
So it's really kind of a holistic approach, right?
Exactly.
We're looking at the traffic, we're looking at how many, have there been any accidents on the road, how many, and then what materials are we using as well.
Yeah,
so exactly. It really is an integrated program.
Yeah.
Got
25 districts and 3 divisions.
Big program.
Yes, it is.
Skid's important, though.
Exactly. So we talk about SAC, and one thing to remember, that SAC is only about friction. It's about skid. It's about resistance to aggregate polishing. That's the only intent when we're establishing a SAC for a project. That's the deal.
Got our skid resistant aggregate right here. All right, it's our local material.
And what is SAC? SAC is not about physical property. So I'm not going to select SAC because I want the best rock. I want the quality. The specification will dictate that. So when you're doing a SMA, for example, or a super pave versus dense graded, well, you're going to get better properties required from a super pave or an SMA.
That's an important concept. You may want to say that one more time because people think that SAC A is best. It's just skid resistant. It has
Exactly.
those properties that we're looking. It's met those properties that we're looking for. It's not necessarily any better than any material, but it just has that additional function. So, and again, one thing that we want to make sure that we talk about here is we're putting it. Where is it? On the surface.
On the final riding surface.
So we don't need it. You know, if you're specifying SAC as an intermediate or base layer, we don't need to specify that. Just let it ride and let the contractor use what he has.
Yeah, good point. Final riding surface only.
Got
That's
it.
where it should be specified. And yeah. So how do the districts determine the SAC that's required for the projects? Well, every pavement design requires what you see there, a Form 2088. That's the Surface Aggregate Selection Form. And the top of the form has the project heading, which you see right there. Then we get down to the roadway characteristics. So we're looking at the demand, the friction demand. And examples are rainfall, traffic, speed, truck traffic, grade. That's all part of the road. That's the roadway characteristics.
Got it.
And how the form works is that the designer will select the rating and then it's assigned some points.
So those just drop-down menu. I click on that and it assigns the points.
Exactly.
Directly,
The
okay.
designer rating will choose it and then it
Okay.
automatically pops up the points.
Okay.
So at the end there, you have a summary, a total summary. So you have a final point count. Then we need to look at or determine the available friction of what we're proposing.
Okay.
So what is the designer proposing? Well, they need to meet that demand. So while cross slope, you can't change that. However, I could look at the microtexture SAC. Will a SAC A or a SAC B put my number of points that's greater than the demand?
Okay.
But I can also look at mixed type. So it doesn't mean that I always have to use a SAC A to get higher points.
Okay.
I have options. I
Okay.
have looking at the mixture type. So it's a balance there.
Okay.
And Richard, is the aggregate is responsible for the term we call microtexture most of the time in friction?
Yeah, excellent
and,
point. So
And the type of mix is more responsible for macro texture. Did I get that right?
yeah, exactly. So macro texture is associated with gradation. Micro texture is associated with the actual surface.
So here's
friction surface
macro
of the rock.
texture, and there's micro texture. All right.
exactly.
Pretty much. Okay.
Exactly.
I got it. Awesome.
Yeah. So I'll use a thin overlay mix or an SMA for the macro texture, but of course combined with micro texture. But that's where the macro texture comes
Gotcha.
into play.
Gotcha. Important.
All right, looking at the selection, it's a balance. It's a balance between demand and what's available. You got to use engineering judgment. It's not just randomly, just trying to pick a number so that the available will exceed the demand. You have to look at it and engineer it. You have to use judgment.
Is it more is better, or if I just, as long as I'm balanced, as long as my demand meets my supply, or
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
demand
as long as
meets
you're
my
available.
I mean,
meets
I don't
the
have to have
demand.
10 points in between.
no.
As long as it's at or just slightly above, we're good to go.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Yep,
Good.
needs to exceed.
Got it.
And mentioned earlier what we just spoke about, macro texture, micro texture. Now, we talked about SAC A, it's only for friction, but right, the inherent properties, you're going to get a more durable rock.
Gotcha.
And how do we determine the SAC? How does the Materials and Test Division determine SAC? They run a test as acid insoluble. As you see those pictures there, it's taking some rock and exposing it to hydrochloric acid and what's insoluble. So generally, the limestone will be more soluble. So that's where it has more calcium carbonate. It's more prone to polishing. And then based upon that test, those results, that's how the SAC is determined and listed in the Bituminous rated source quality catalog.
So in general, if it's a limestone, it won't meet that SAC A material.
Exactly.
Okay.
Predominantly, most of it will be soluble.
Okay.
it'll dissolve with that hydrochloric acid.
Okay.
Richard, there's a dolomitic limestone that's available in Texas, a number of deposits, and that means magnesium and carbon in combination with a carbonate. Are the dolomites also acid soluble?
That's a good point. So when you're looking at a dolomite, like you mentioned, it has a content, magnesium content, but not every dolomite will have the same amount of magnesium.
Okay.
Maybe 20% and maybe 60%. As a rule of thumb, TxDOT will designate a source as dolomitic, when it has more than 50% magnesium.
Okay.
So
So that's the split.
That's the
Oh,
split.
okay.
So,
Okay. Okay.
and that's where the insoluble will separate that. A source that has more magnesium, like you said, will have a higher acid insoluble
Okay.
value.
All right.
So
That
that's
makes
how
sense.
we differentiate between those two.
So it's 50% or more.
Right.
Got it. Got it.
And mentioned earlier, we have the Bituminous Rated Source Quality Catalog. It's a catalog that publishes the SAC and the acid insoluble test results. The catalog is part of the Aggregate Quality Monitoring Program. It falls under that. The
And that
program
falls
is an
under
umbrella,
MTD.
and that's all by MTD,
Okay.
correct.
Got it.
So MTD will request sampling from the districts. The districts will sample and then send the rock to the materials and tests, and they run the tests.
How frequently are the tests run for a particular deposit? Once
So,
a year, once every 2 years?
A minimum 6 months.
Every 6 months?
Every 6 months. However, districts have the latitude that they can sample anytime,
Time.
generally monthly. If
Okay.
you are going to sample a higher frequency, it's monthly.
Okay.
No less than monthly. Unless there could be a problem, a concern, sure. But a rule of thumb there we do is, hey, monthly.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Now also, the part of the program are those physical test results. So it's not only looking at friction,
Mm-hmm.
it's also looking at durability. So part of the program, it's alleviating that testing from the districts. So
Instead of them
districts-
having to go out each time and check it, all I got to do is look on the list and say, this source has these properties, and either it's good to go or it's not.
Yeah, exactly. I have
Perfect.
item 344.
Right.
I have ABC. I look at the catalog. Oh, meets. It's good to go.
Well, that makes sense. Because you've got, aggregate going into more than one district. Aggregate could be going
Exactly.
all the way across the state. I mean, so if that would be so much repetition, just
Right.
not efficient at all.
Not having the resources, not
Yeah.
having the time, the people, etc., space, equipment. So it just makes sense.
Yep, got it.
And here's an example. So as you can see, it lists the producer, the quarry, and we have it highlighted there in a red box. That's a SAC.
Okay.
So the SAC is listed for each source.
So that's the piece I'm looking for. The rest of the stuff, we're not really going to get into today. That could be a whole nother discussion. But that's where I need to know based on that value that I'm going to put in my 2088,
Yes.
right? And I need to know where that material's coming from, and just to verify that material is now going to meet the requirements.
And this is a listing of all sources in Texas that are on this program, is that correct?
And not only Texas, New Mexico,
That's right.
Arkansas, Louisiana. Yeah. Not only, and we believe there's one in
Oklahoma.
Mexico. So
Mhm.
they can be anywhere.
Yeah, gotcha.
Look at the geology. So part of the program on that catalog, we have sandstone, we have limestone, dolomite. We have these different types. The geology in Texas is very vast, very different throughout the whole state and the neighboring states.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see there, now when we break it down by number and we look at SAC A, SAC B, roughly over 40% of the sources are SAC A. And you think, wow, that's great, right? TxDOT Texas has a great...
Why are we even talking about it?
Exactly. Texas has a great supply. However, let's look at the map and where those sources are located. And if you look at the circles, the red circles, they're at the outskirts of Texas.
West Texas, South Texas,
Exactly.
North Texas, but in that middle part,
Not in Texas.
not in the
Not in the-
not in the as they
Central
call it, the
Texas.
triangle. There's
Yep.
what, one or two?
Yep.
Yeah, and I think that to me, I think is kind of the biggest challenge, because we're using this more. That we're using it for asphalt aggregate, we're using it for seal coat aggregate, but that same aggregate, it's going to go into concrete. It's going to go into a whole bunch of different areas, and they don't care about SAC in those other materials, but it's still using the same source of material. So I think that's one thing I think people may not think about, is where all that material is going, and it's going. And I mean, it's a huge growth that we've got right now, and I don't anticipate that slowing down at all.
No, the sources, as you pointed out, are mainly on the borders or outside the borders of Texas for SAC A, and a lot of the sources of SAC A, as I understand it, Richard, that are in the state of Texas are limited in quantity too. So that even puts more of a squeeze on the SAC A availability issue.
So when we look at the characteristics, so in general, in terms of friction, the rock with the highest or the higher acid insolubility, that's the rock that's going to give you the more friction.
Good.
However, generally, the SAC A rock is a better quality is a better quality aggregate.
Sure.
So like I mentioned, if you have an SMA, the aggregate qualities are better. And in general, the SAC A will meet those requirements.
Okay.
There's a perception of quality with SAC A being better, and Richard just indicated, in general, the SAC A designation probably gives you a little bit better aggregate. It rules out certain stones that may have high absorption or high abrasion, et cetera, but it's not a designation to be used other than to provide surface friction on a roadway.
Right.
It's not
Right.
to be used to designate an aggregate for a higher quality just by itself, and I think that's something to keep in mind. We talked about the supply and demand issue a little bit, and the demand is high. It will become higher, as we'll see in just a minute, and the supply is limited not only by number and location, which means haul distance and increased costs, but also by the limited supply within the boundaries of Texas.
Gotcha.
And so if the location is a long ways away from your project, you've got a cost problem and a delivery problem, and from time to time we have trucking shortages in Texas. In fact, it's been that way mostly for the last 20 or 25 years, and that creates a problem on delivery.
Sure.
And rail delivery is not always on time as the contractors would like to have it. So there's been some issues on some projects, Jim, again, to my understanding, that we can't get SAC A aggregate as designated in the plans and specifications to complete the construction project on time. It's been holding up some of the construction activities
Sure.
for some time in areas. So the demand is not going away. Texas is growing, and there's more truck traffic on the highway, there's more traffic on highways, there's people moving to Texas every day. It's very evident on our highways that we have a lot of traffic out there that's not going to go away. As the traffic volume goes up, the demand for friction goes up because we're more interested in polishing stones. I should say stones that do not polish, and that's the SAC A stone that
Right.
we have to get here.
Yep.
So we want these aggregates that don't polish. We have seen an increase in hot mix and seal coat aggregates over the last several years. So there's more of a demand for this aggregate, higher traffic, more of a demand for it. And again, as we pointed out, the seal coats and the hot mix and other materials in the concrete arena and other types of surfacings have a competition for this size of aggregate.
And they all want it at the same time. That's another.
Surprisingly, isn't
that's
it?
a whole nother. That's a whole nother thing. I mean, just the timing of all these operations is, you know, you go through the winter and it goes down, but boy, once spring hits and the weather gets good, everybody's wanting to pave and the seal coaters are ready to go to work, and the demand is just tremendous. I know the seal coat folks have been working with TxDOT on trying to get the lettings scheduled properly so they can get the orders in for the aggregate, and there's a whole series of things that are moving kind of behind the curtain, if you will, just to try to keep, when we're ready to go, we're ready to go. And so there's a lot of work being done on that all over the place.
And the seal coat season's roughly May 1st to September 15th, and that's the heart of the hot mix season.
Yep.
Not that hot mix can't be placed before that and after that, and it is, but the demand is just very critical in that short window of opportunity. You look on the slide here, you see the red areas identified here, 1/2 by 3/8 and 3/8 by number 4. Essentially, there's a tremendous demand for aggregates in the hot mix arena and the seal coat arena for that. And these are essentially the aggregates that are shown here in front of us. It's that size range and a little bit smaller.
That's
And
3/8 by 4, I believe.
That's where the demand is.
Right there.
And there's usually most quarries and pits have plenty of materials on the finer side of that, and they have And the quarries have a lot of materials on the upper side of that because they're crushing bedrock.
But that middle,
And the middle part is the one that's hard to produce and hard to size in a uniform fashion and also very quickly. So it creates a production demand or a problem that we should address.
gotcha.
Limited sources, geographic locations, as we mentioned, the haul costs, as we mentioned, availability of haul vehicles, and production
distances.
limitations. All this comes
Yeah.
together at one point.
Even the distance for hauling material now,
Yeah,
it
that's
seems
correct.
to be getting stretched
Further
out.
and further out,
Yeah.
and more time, more coordination, et cetera. Current research, there's some things going on now that we should be aware of, and Richard's got a good handle on that based on his recent experience at TxDOT.
Yeah, so what are we looking at? Looking down the road, what research can do for us. So TxDOT has at least 4 projects that involve skid and friction of roadways. And one component of this research is looking at the dynamic friction test, referred to as the DFT, which isn't anything new. This test has been around for several years. It's a roadway test, as you can see on the screen there on the left. And then how the device looks like, it has these rubber pads. And this disc spins around, it spins up to 50 miles per hour and is dropped on the pavement.
Dropped, yeah.
Yep. Well, first the device sprays water.
Mm-hmm.
It spins up to 50 and it drops on the pavement, and then the machine is recording and measuring these friction values.
As it deaccelerates, kind of the
Correct.
torque.
Yep.
Okay.
Torque,
gotcha.
spring, what have you.
Got it.
Right.
Got it.
So again, this is nationally recognized. This is not a new test. So where TxDOT is exploring and how they can adapt or incorporate this into their skid analysis. And here's a close-up of what the disc and the slider looks like. There's 3 sliders, and they're made of the rubber, and that's what's being tested on the road. So what is TxDOT doing? TxDOT is trying to adapt the test to the lab. And they've developed, what you can see right there, is a ring. And in that ring, aggregate is placed. And it's placed to where it's dropped in, it's not hand placed.
So it's a groove.
stretched.
It's a groove in that plastic
Yes.
board.
It's
Okay.
about a 1/2 inch deep.
Okay.
And Bondo is placed first, and adhesive, and then the rock is sprinkled in. It's not hand placed, it's sprinkled in.
Okay.
And then rolled.
I was
such
going to
that
say, I
firm.
don't think I'd like that job.
No. no.
All
Jim, you'd
day.
be good at it. You'd be good at it.
I don't know. Maybe I would like it. Who knows? Some days I think I probably would. I just need something really simple.
And this concept isn't new. The Maryland DOT actually does this. They actually have a spec and procedures in place. It's a little different.
Yeah.
And in Texas, our procedure is faster. It's more efficient. It's just a lot of testing by Materials and Test Division. You're testing roughly 120 sources, and it's time consuming. So this has been developed to fit the operations of Materials and Test Division.
And so they have tested all the sources on the bituminous rated source?
Yes.
Okay. So they have a number for each material. Okay.
Yes.
Uh,
Now, probably not for the sources that were added this year.
recently. Okay.
Recently,
Okay.
correct, and
Okay.
possibly also last year, because TxDOT, they've added about 14 sources
Really?
since late last year. Yeah.
Wow.
Unfortunately, only one's been SAC A, but in terms of testing, catching up.
Okay.
So
Gotcha.
the key to this testing is polishing the rock, because that's what we're looking for. We want to test rock that's to terminal friction, and so TxDOT uses the Micro Duval test. And this just works in line with their operation, because they run this test as we briefly spoke about earlier, as part of their program, as part of the AQMP. So they take the rock from the test, and then they'll take it and make a ring and test it with DFT. So that's where it's efficient.
So it's a little rock tumbler
Exactly.
with water and
With
pellet.
water and these steel
bearings.
spares.
Yep.
Yeah, it degrades it. Wears it, as you can see on the right there. It polishes, and that's a limestone, as you can see the degree of polishing. And what's good about this is that all the rocks are polished the same. Same amount of time, same effort, same. So across the board, everything's getting treated and polished exactly the same.
Gotcha.
So it's all relative. And here's a close-up. And as you can see that ring, the aggregate's pretty tight in that ring there. and there's a scoop of how it's spread, and we place some Bondo. But the key is minimal hand placement. That's the key.
So
'Cause
you're
don't
just
wanna-
kind of dumping it around
Exactly.
and making sure it's square, but you're not sitting there reorganizing each piece.
Right.
Gotcha.
And also part of the research, that's one aspect, is testing the rock.
Mm-hmm.
But what's also good is that the research is looking at testing mix.
What's on the road
What's
matters.
on the road,
Yep.
exactly. They can test slabs, or what you see right there, these are molds from the super paved gyratory compactor. This is ideal. You're doing a mix design, you're using the super
You
paved,
got them anyway.
and you have them, right?
Yeah.
And they're generally to density.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty quick, efficient, and easy.
So
And
they'll test that. They'll run that on it for a while, and then they'll test it, right? It's not just going to terminal. They're testing it over a period of time.
Exactly.
Okay.
1,000,
Okay.
2,000, 10,000, generally up to 150,000 cycles.
Okay.
Then the key is how many repetitions of the wheel or the micro devolved equals such traffic volume in the field. What 10,000 ADT
And
or what it is.
that's the big
that's
the big question
that's
right
elusive
now.
right now, I guess.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
So, we've
So
got
we
to
have a
correlate all
test
that.
method. Now we need to correlate it to
Yes.
Traffic.
traffic.
Yeah, the
Gotcha.
polisher's the
Roadway.
traffic and the friction device is the skid trailer
Yeah.
in the field.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
there's a couple
There you
correlations
go.
that are
I like that.
really important to us here.
Yep.
So there's a problem. We don't have enough SAC A air.
That's why we're here.
That's
yeah.
why we're here.
That's why we're talking about it.
So what can we do? Well, there's several things that we can take steps to help ease that problem, and some of them are pretty apparent to us, of course. And the first thing is we're trying to supply an aggregate that has adequate friction initially, after construction, and after being polished by traffic over a period of time. So we want it polish resistant as well. And we only need it on the pavement travel lanes. We don't need it on the layer underneath
Right.
the traffic.
Right.
It has no purpose down there
Right.
in terms of friction. So that's one thing. We want to keep them in the surface layers only.
Okay.
Don't need them in the intermediate pavement layers or inner layers. A lot of times you'll see a SAC A area used as a inner layer, chip seal kind of an inner layer. That's not needed either because the
Right.
traffic on there is a very short period of time, if at all, and it's just not needed. We don't need it on the shoulders.
Okay.
So even if we have a surface course on the shoulders, we don't need SAC A aggregate there. Detours of limited durations, we certainly don't need them there. And the lower traffic volume roadways, we don't need them as well.
But the 2088 form would pick that out then on the
It
lower,
should pick it out as
because
best
it
we
will
know
change
today.
it'll change the demand
Right.
on the lower traffic levels. Okay, got it.
And one thing to keep in mind here, depending upon rainfall and rainfall frequency, rain will actually increase the friction on some limestones for some period of time. Now, I wouldn't count on that all the time,
Okay.
of course, in Texas, but
Okay.
you can have a limestone that appears to be polished and get a little bit of rain on it, and the friction will go up
Okay.
because of a little bit of a mild acid, and the rain will etch the stone a little bit.
Okay.
But we're not counting on that here. And then we've learned to blend the SAC A with other materials, very commonly done, to produce a satisfactory friction for our roadways. So those are things we can do right now to take care of a few things. A few other things that we can do in the longer term approaches is use SAC A wrap sources. This is presently under investigation. TTI is doing that.
Yep.
And the idea is to mill off a SAC A aggregate of an existing road and use it as reclaimed asphalt pavement back in the hot mix again.
Take that off, take that layer off, keep it separate,
Yes.
and then test the properties of this, and then if that meets, then we can use that as a source of material and then put it back in. But
Put it
that
back
work is ongoing.
It's ongoing.
We don't have a final answer on that or a
Not sure,
process
but
yet.
it's promising.
Yeah,
If-
okay.
But we have to
It may
manage.
help us, it may help, I mean, anything that can help. I don't know if there's there's never gonna be a one-size-fit-all for everything, but I think if we can find some things, this works here, that works there, this works here, we pulls the demand down a little bit and kind of
Spreads it out.
moderates it out a little bit.
That's right.
Okay,
And a key issue here is to manage the stockpiles of wrap to make sure that we keep that so-called SAC A area
Yeah.
at a high level. Evaluate source-specific friction, which can be performed by districts. There's There's some aggregates that some people call B plus, A minus, whatever you want to call them, that maybe don't meet the SAC A aggregate, but they're pretty high on the acid insoluble scale, or they don't seem to polish very frequently. Maybe they can be used on some intermediate traffic volume roadways that we don't pick up with our 2088 form right now.
And that will be a decision that's made once we come to that
It should
point.
be based on data.
Data.
Yes,
Gotcha.
and as an engineer, you're not going to select something that you're worried about not providing the friction.
Right.
It's going to be based on traffic, surface texture, friction measurements you made on the roadway,
Gotcha.
et cetera. And this will involve some of the research that Richard's talked about, correlation of dynamic friction tester to friction testing on open highways with a lock wheel skid trailer, et cetera.
Cool.
So there's a number of things we can do there. Maybe we need to develop a new classification criteria. There's a little bit of work going on that. Can we expand production of our existing facilities? Can our suppliers change crusher types, product streams that they're producing out of these pits, et cetera? Maybe we can do a few things in that regard too to increase the supply of these difficult sizes to produce. Find new sources. I can guarantee you there are people looking for new sources all the time.
Always.
There's plenty of SAC A aggregate in this country. There's plenty of it.
lot
It's
of
just a long ways away.
Yeah, it's a long way away.
It's a long
Yeah.
ways away.
Or there's somebody built on top of it,
But
which
that
can be
happens
could
too
be a
in
challenge.
many areas. There's some other things that have been used. Virginia's had a friction problem, the state of Virginia, for years. They've developed a technique where they lay hot mix and they sprinkle a high friction aggregate on top of
A
it.
chip, yeah.
A chip,
Yep.
and roll it in, and that's
Yep.
provided pretty good friction for them.
Yep.
So there's a few things like that that we could take a look at. Crushed concrete, we could use that in our hot mixes as well. It has a high absorption, which creates a little bit of problem on cost, but maybe it's going to produce good friction for us and help alleviate some of the problems.
I remember seeing
some
some
of the
projects
areas.
in my old job where they crushed up an interstate and they treated that as a mine.
Yes.
They took that material and they had to meet all the requirements that the mine met in that state, and they produced it. It did have a high absorption, so
Yes.
they put more asphalt in it, but they were able to reuse the aggregate,
And that may be a lower cost alternative in certain areas that we have.
or use that here, but then I can use that there. So
Right.
kind of the moving stuff around a little bit. Yep.
And then concrete's been used as a chip for chip seals too in one of our districts out actually Amarillo a number of years ago.
And I know Chuck will say, if you ever give Chuck a chance, he said they've actually used fractionated wrap
for
as a chip
seals.
seal.
That's
aggregate.
correct.
Yep.
That's exactly
Yep.
right.
It's pre-coated.
It's pre-coated. It is partially pre-coated. That's
That
all
one's
it
for you,
counts.
Chuck.
And then there's intermediate size aggregates that we've always relied on the friction coming from the upper part of the area,
that-
plus number four
four,
kinds of materials.
Yep.
And there's some data to suggest from UT El Paso and other places too that the smaller aggregates contribute to friction maybe more than we think it does.
That 30, 50 sieve range
well,
up in
50, maybe a little above the
A little
50.
above
yeah.
them,
Number
Yeah.
4 to number 30.
Yeah.
4 to 30? Okay.
So there's some things there we need to take a serious look at. Supplier considerations, they need time to locate
Sure.
and start operation, a greenfield operation.
It's a
8,
long
10 or 12
process.
years.
Yeah.
It's a decade
Yeah.
by and large.
Yep.
It's an investment.
Yep.
It takes new financial resources.
I mean,
to
you
do
worked
that.
in that side from when you were in the private side. and
It's
That's a lot of work.
A lot of money and a lot of time.
Yep.
A lot of time.
Yep.
Each source responds different to blasting and crushing and size and degradation. You try to anticipate what that is when you're doing your exploratory work, and you actually take some of the material if you can and take it to a crushing plant and crush it and see what you produce.
And
see
the
what
type
size
of crusher matters.
Yes, it does.
So you're gonna, yeah. I mean,
Jaw
there's a
crushers,
whole
jaw cones,
thing.
vertical
Yeah.
impact, et cetera.
Yep.
So they're screening decks and shape that comes out of there naturally, et cetera, the shapes you can produce. So there's a lot of production things that have to be considered if you're going to go into a new supply, and it takes an investment, like we just said, and it's a little bit of a risk. There's no question about it.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
One size material production for coarse aggregate is expensive, as we just pointed out, no matter how you do it, whenever you do it.
Yeah.
Agency, what can TxDOT do? Keep the suppliers informed of future demands of various types of materials. How much seal coat am I going to do this year in the district? How much hot mix do I plan on doing? We're trying to, and TxDOT is supplying through the maintenance division the anticipated demand for seal coats
And asphalt.
and asphalt hot mixes
And that's been very helpful.
for up to 4 years out. It's
Yeah.
probably pretty good a year out,
Yeah.
6 months out,
Yeah.
good enough, and that will help stimulate the contractors to get materials on board and equipment on board to produce these mixes.
Yep.
And we need to understand the limitations of production on specific types of materials. You can only do so much with the materials that you have available.
Yeah, if you go into a market and say, I just want this size stone, that's going to mess up a whole guy's production thing. And you may or may not be able to get it, but if you can get it, it may be kind of expensive.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about pricing or anything like that, but it's supply and demand. And I think the thing is, when aggregate producer is going into a place, he's got so many millions of cubic yards of rock that he wants to process. He wants to sell all that, or as much of that as possible. He doesn't want to only sell 50% of it and have a 50% waste. He wants to find uses for all those different materials. And like you were saying earlier, there's a bit demand for seal coat, there's a demand for hot mix, there's demand for concrete of various sizes, other products as well. I mean, aggregate goes into a lot of stuff. Aggregate goes into toothpaste. I mean, it goes into all kinds of stuff. So that we've got to understand that you can't just say, hey, well, today I want this and tomorrow I want that. Like you said, 10 years, huge investment, millions and millions of dollars of investments to set up a system to produce a suite of products. And you just can't go in and say, well, I want to change it, because it's just not really going to be available.
There's a lot of inertia.
A lot of inertia. That's a good way of putting it. This is a great chart here.
Yeah, the triangle, of course, is pretty well known to
Not the
everybody.
Bermuda Triangle,
it's
is it?
Bermuda Triangle, yeah.
The Texas Triangle.
It's the Texas Triangle, and of course that's where the population center of Texas primarily is.
Yep.
And that's where there's a shortage of available SAC A aggregates
Not
where the
too
population
many
is and the
dots
roadways.
in there.
No, there's not a lot of them
Yeah.
in there. I don't know why Richard didn't put them in there. He didn't do it. So we do have an issue in parts of Texas, and it's bigger than what that triangle shows.
Sure.
Northeastern part of the state, we get quite a bit of pretty good quality SAC A areas out of Oklahoma and Arkansas. So if you look at the Atlanta and Paris district, for example, is there an issue up there? Not a major issue,
Yeah.
but there's some issues. If
Yeah.
you get out in far west Texas, northwest Texas, there's some issues out there, but there's a few gravel sources remaining, and there's a synthetic, not a synthetic, I'm sorry, a natural lightweight material, volcanic material that's used for chip seals and other things. And then far west Texas and El Paso, there's granite diorites, andesites, and those kinds of igneous rocks
Yeah,
out
good
there
rock.
in those mountains
Yeah.
that do give you some SAC A aggregate sources
So it's a long haul.
in that area.
It's a long haul to
It
the
is.
middle of the
It
triangle.
is, and the same thing down in Rio Grande Valley. There's some gravel deposits down there that meet SAC A and scattered around that area, and it's a
Gotcha.
long haul too.
Yeah.
The biggest problem is where that Texas Triangle is, of course, and that's what we're trying to solve.
Yep.
So in summary, some of the takeaways that we have, and Jim's going to talk about those just for a minute here.
Yeah, I think the big thing here is communication and talking to your aggregate suppliers, letting them know what's coming. As John said, having that discussion, making sure people know what the forecast is going to be. If there's a really big job or a switch in materials, we're going to do, we're going to do TOMs, or we're going to do, SMAs or something like that, and do 300,000 tons of it where they haven't done any of it. That's a big change in the aggregate requirement and demand in that area. So we just want to start early. Again, TxDOT's got the form. It's been around a long time. It may not be perfect, but it's what we got. And so I think it's using that and some good engineering judgment, as you guys talked about earlier, is a real key thing. Again, just a big thing, you've mentioned this, John, just make sure we're using SAC A in the surface, in the final riding surface. And those other areas, don't put it in there. just in that material level, don't put a SAC requirement in there, because you don't have to, then contractor can meet what he needs to meet all the other mixed design requirements. And again, some districts are saying, hey, it's not a problem, we don't have this problem. Okay, as Harold would say, me no Alamo. Okay, but it may be an issue if there's a big demand in the district next to you that doesn't have it, and now they're running and stealing your stuff. So it's Texas is a big place, and and as the map really showed how diverse that material is, and how many different products that we've got. We're just trying to look out for each other a little bit, make sure we all can get done what we need to get done, and build the roads we need to build, and maintain them the way we need to maintain them. MTD, great resource. We you're not there anymore, so I'm sure the person coming behind you will be, but you left a really good team there, and there's some really good folks there, and I've enjoyed meeting them. And for those of you that don't, get to know your people at MTD, and in the aggregate section, and the asphalt section, the mix section, and that other section we won't talk about here. But there's some really good people over, really dedicated to understanding the materials, and I have not met anybody there that hasn't been willing to explain something to me if I have a question in any of the areas. We've been over there a bunch of times and said, hey, what does that do? Well, they'll explain it to me, even if it's it's out of my area. So please ask the question. Please ask the question. And as you guys said, there's stuff coming, but it ain't here. And so for a while, for the next period, we're going to have to kind of work together to try to work this out. And as new things come online, we'll let everybody know, and we'll probably do another one of these and say, hey, we got a new aggregate test. We've solved the, here's the new DFT thing, or whatever we're going to come up with, and said this is now how we can do it. But again, it's got to be based on science. It's got to be based on data. We got to show we got a huge risk out there, and we got to make sure we're taking care of people. And you're just talking about your grandkids earlier. Now they're off to college, and your kids off to college, and mine's driving, and my daughter-in-law, they're driving all over the place, and we want to make sure they got good roads to drive on, and everybody else. So it's your kids too, and everybody else. So help's coming, but want to make sure everybody does their part. So you had I think in here kind of some acronyms in here. We'll make this presentation available on our website, and try to attach it to this program as well, just so everybody's got a copy of it. And again, if you need anything, feel free to holler. There's a lot of work being done right now, a lot of research being done at a lot of the universities here in Texas and other places as well. And it's not just a Texas thing. Mm-hmm. I think that's important to remember, that skid or friction is important all over the place. And if it's dry and it never rains, well, you got what you got. But in the areas where you get a lot of rain, it becomes a much bigger issue, and that's why we drive to certain types of products in those areas, like PFCs and SMAs and those kinds of things that give us that more of that macro texture that we're looking for, and even the water spray reduction that a PFC can bring to the table. So lots of cool options out there for us. So, all right, now I didn't tell you I was going to do this. Now I'm going to throw a couple questions at you, and the first one is quality. What does quality mean to you? And then the other question is, it going to make you king for a day? You get to change anything. Okay, so I'll let you think about this just for a second. Okay, so what does quality mean to you? Okay, who wants to go first?
I just say quality, not to be cliche, is about safety.
Okay.
That's the key.
Okay, good. What do you think?
From a contract point of view, quality implies that you meet the specification for the project.
Okay, specification compliance.
And the specification defines the quality as it's understood at that particular time.
Okay.
That's a definition.
What's do you have a personal one?
Can't think of something right now,
Okay.
Jim.
I mean, mine would be meeting or exceeding the expectations or the compliance. That would be a
Yeah,
definition.
and I just indicated meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think meeting or exceeding
Yeah.
is absolutely correct.
Okay, perfect.
But that's a legal definition.
Legal definition, and that's fine. That's fine. Absolutely, absolutely. Been doing it for a while. I get a variety of responses on that. How about you can change anything? Let's keep it to construction and keep it to materials and.
Oh, come on.
Well, all right. Go ahead, do what you want.
Change anything, you can run soundness testing in a day.
All right. Okay.
That would be nice.
All right. Kaboom! Throw it in the microwave and boom! I got a sound
All we gotta
test.
do is
3
change-
minutes later, I'm good to go.
Richard just wants to change chemistry and physics. Other than that, it's not a problem.
Hey, he's king for a day. He gets to
Yeah,
do what he
right.
wants, man.
Yeah.
Don't poop on his parade.
If I was king for a day, Jim, I would try to ensure that TxDOT and industry continues to work together as good as they are today, which is, I think, very good.
Yeah, I agree.
Very
Yep.
good, and they exceed that as we move along in time.
Awesome. I like it.
That would be my king for a day, because I think a lot of good things happen out of that.
Absolutely. Yep. When working together is amazing.
Yep.
Is amazing. Well, that's all we've got for today. Thank you so much for participating. Remember, this program airs the third Thursday of every month at 3 o'clock Central Time. Remember that these programs are also posted on our YouTube site, and you can like, subscribe, and share as well as on Spotify and on the Apple podcast program. So until next time, we thank you for participating today. Thank you guys for coming in and sitting down with me, and we really appreciate it. And take care of everybody. Be safe and ever forward. Thanks a lot. Thanks again. Take care, everybody.